saw on Friday?
Well, this week, Danny, I think it is going to be risk defined by China. Are you at the bottom of China in terms of the stimulus that comes? I think we are going to be controlled by what happens in terms of these back channels. What are they? Is there a de-escalation or is there full ground assault? And I think ultimately we will be redirected on the inflation narrative. But for the week's momentum, it is down to geopolitics of the Middle East and perhaps the bottoming of China.
Well, if geopolitics, Manus, means that we're going to be buying bonds, that's certainly going to be challenged by the inflation narrative. Sure, Harker says disinflation is in, but the UMich survey had inflation expectations for consumers at a 5-month high. And
that reinforces the higher for longer. Let's reset to our top story. President Biden is weighing a trip to Israel. The president warned against Israeli occupation of Gaza and said the U.S. troops don't need to be deployed on the ground.
Can you foresee U.S. troops in combat in this new Middle East war?
I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. I guarantee we're going to provide them everything they need.
Getting their allies on board.
Let's get to Oliver Crook. He's in Tel Aviv. Oliver, the very latest on the Israeli ground offensive. It seems as if some back channels are in operation and some opening for exodus of the Palestinians has also been underway. What is the latest?
The other part is the fact that in August, Huawei was
so what we got this weekend was a sort of confirmation from the Israel Defense Forces that there will be a ground component at some stage in the next phase of this war. Right now, they've been focused on the aerial bombardments, which have continued through the weekend, and also trying to open up corridors, these sort of arteries that go down the center of Gaza so that civilians can evacuate from the north down to the south. They've had a sort of a non-bombardment clause on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and actually today, 8 till noon, they said they will not bomb, and that expires right now. So the other issue in Gaza is it is very difficult for aid to get in and out. There have been some discussions about possible opening on the border with Egypt, but that has not yet been confirmed. We understand there are aid trucks lined up there. And then the attention is also going to the north. There has been more and more fighting on the northern border with Lebanon, not to a point that is sort of in full spillover, but it's something that people need to be conscious of. There has been a second aircraft carrier group by the United States deployed to the eastern Mediterranean. And of course, last night we had Chuck Schumer, Mitt Romney, a number of bipartisan senators here in Tel Aviv who gave a press conference espousing full support for Israel and saying that they're going to get something done in terms of aid from the United States.
Right. Well, on that note, Oliver, we have U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken back in Tel Aviv today after that trip across the Middle East. At this point, what are his top priorities?
So he's just landed in Tel Aviv, we understand. And so let's just remind everybody where he was. He was in Israel, then to Jordan, then the Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. He's been talking to all of these leaders. And his priority really is a question of escalation as number one. Number two, aid in getting some of these corridors open in Gaza. But then also the question of hostages. And we don't get a lot of information on the hostage negotiations. Obviously, those are intensely sensitive. So there's some back channels working there. In terms of aid, we understand that the border crossing with Rafah with Egypt may open up. And we understand from Egyptian ministries that they are preparing for the possibility of a large influx in their hospitals of Gazans. And the question of escalation, this is about deterrence, yes, with Iran, but it's also about having a message with Israeli leadership. He said it on Thursday when he was here in Tel Aviv. How Israel goes about dismantling Hamas will be absolutely critical. And we saw that in full display with huge protests across the streets of the Arab world. And so these are all the things that he needs to bring back now when he's talking to Israeli leadership today.
And herein lies the point, Oliver. The word that I use and Danny used to try and put context around this for our audience, our global audience, understanding risk, is about back channels are open and there is this effort ahead of any ground invasion to try and change the situation. But what are these back channels? Is Qatar the best hope? I mean, they are the home to the political office of Hamas. So is it the Qataris that have the power to shift the dial?
But we also understand, yeah, I mean, that obviously is going to be one of the main levers that the United States is going to try to pull. But we understand that there's also been efforts within the United States to back channel with Iran. We understand that the Saudis have been in communication with Iran as well. And also the rhetoric from Iran has been fairly sharp. Starting on Friday, they said that if this continues in Gaza, they could see another front opening up in the war. We heard from the foreign minister's office today from Iran saying that a new front could be limited not just to a specific border, but the entirety of what they consider to be Palestine. And again, we have a second aircraft carrier group coming to the Eastern Mediterranean. And just to put a little bit of kind of contours around kind of what the threat from Hezbollah is to the Israeli state, there are thousands and thousands of rockets sort of disguised in southern Lebanon that Hamas controls, and that, you know, Iron Dome is fairly effective. We say there's about a 90% hit rate on that. But if you get thousands of rockets going over, you know, 10% of many thousands is still a lot, and also that volume. You may not get a 90% rate. So these are all the things that are front and center here in Israel, where we've been getting about 2 sirens a day since Friday here in Tel Aviv.
Oliver, thank you very much. That is Oliver Crook reporting live from Tel Aviv. Now, with the war between Israel and Hamas persisting, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva warned it's a very difficult time for the world economy.
What the fund is concentrated now on is to very carefully monitor what could be the economic impact of the new eruption of tensions in the Middle East. So far, what we see is relatively contained. Oil prices are going up and down, but there hasn't been a huge spike. Some nervousness in markets, understandably.
Joining us now is Bloomberg's Will Kennedy, Senior Executive Editor for Energy and Commodities. Well, thanks for joining. I mean, Georgieva talking there, no big spike in oil prices yet. Bloomberg Intelligence, Bloomberg Economics says that if there's escalation, it could get to 150. Where do we stand right now in the fragility of this oil market, dependent on what's happening in the Middle East?
It's a nervous market. On Friday, we finally saw quite a bit of buying, and we saw Brent rise $5 fairly rapidly. In the options market, we also saw people buying a fair amount of protection to oil going a lot higher. And again, gold also spiked. So you saw some concern going into the weekend that the war may escalate and that people should position themselves. Today's a lot calmer. You've described all the diplomatic efforts that are going on, perhaps to make sure that things are not quite as catastrophic as they might otherwise be, and oil market is waiting to see. But clearly, the progress of the situation in the Middle East is a dominant driver of the oil market right now.
Well, good morning. I like one of the stories that we put out this morning, which is Biden is going to struggle to try and batten down both on Iran and their exports, which we know are strong, Will, especially to China, and at the same time try and readdress the political narrative and the supply narrative with Russia. I mean, we're only like a couple of headlines away from $100 oil. Is that the biggest issue at the moment, the Russia-Iran balance of power in the oil market?
Well, as you know, Manus, the US has been concerned to try and keep the oil market fairly well supplied. It is a huge political issue, and we're going into an election year. And I think that the Biden administration won't want to see oil prices rise too far, too fast. It can avoid it. But at the same time, there are political imperatives that might suggest that they may want to look both at Iran and Russia. On the Russian side, the price cap, which is one of the flagship policies of the administration, clearly isn't working anymore. Russian oil is selling at the market price and a long way from the price cap. And then on Iran, given the situation in Israel, there is a lot of pressure to clamp down on those exports that come freely. So they will probably have to act on both. How much they can really change is another question. And I think that a lot of people in the market think the Iranian flows in particular, which mostly go to China, are fairly well insulated from US action at this stage. All
right, Will, great to get your thoughts this morning. Will Kennedy there from the energy team. Now let's get to some of our other top stories that are trending on the terminal this morning. Poland's opposition is on course for majority after Sunday's election, an upset that would deny the ruling nationalists a third term and seek the country re-engaged with the European Union. And over in New Zealand, voters have picked a centre-right government to manage the mounting economic challenges in the aftermath of the pandemic. Christopher Luxon set to become the nation's new prime minister after his national party won the biggest share of the vote in Saturday's election.
Well, on Capitol Hill, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries says informal talks surrounding a possible bipartisan solution to the speakership situation is underway. The House has been without a speaker since October the 3rd. Representative Jim Jordan is currently the front runner for that position. Danny.
And elsewhere in the U.S., pharmacy chain Rite Aid has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection and said it will shutter more stores. It also said it clinched a restructuring deal with holders of its senior secured notes and appointed Jeffrey S. Stein as CEO, citing his expertise in turning around companies.
Well, coming up, we speak to Klaus Bader, global chief economist over at Société Générale, right here on Bloomberg.
I was putting so much pressure on myself. And when I changed my mindset midway through the tournament and just approached it one game at a time.
Lloyd with Morgan streaking. She's chipping the goalkeeper! Off the post and in! Hat-trick for Lloyd!
I went from really just being under the radar to suddenly being in the spotlight.
You know who I'm talking about, Carly Lloyd! Carly Lloyd! Ladies and gentlemen, we have an American hero.
I had speaking engagements, sponsors that wanted to sign me, appearances, you name it, I had it. It became very mentally draining for the next easily couple years because I was extremely busy. But I knew that if I'm going to have any type of retirement, any type of financial stability when I'm done playing, I had to take every advantage of my opportunity.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
I see a world where financial conditions have gotten tighter and the transition mechanism, which the Fed would like to see in slowing down the economy, which we all expected, it's taken a lot longer. So the real impact of higher costs around the globe in the US and Western Europe, it's not been felt yet. And so when people say, well, we're going to have a soft landing, I'm skeptical.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Manus Granny in New York with Danny Berger in London. The US plans to tighten curbs on China's access to advanced semiconductors and chip-making gear, closing the loopholes from last year's measures. The Biden administration will add Chinese chip design firms to the trade restriction list and impose additional checks on companies attempting to evade export controls by routing shipments through other nations.
Now, at the same time, Manus, China's central bank is making the biggest medium-term liquidity injection since 2020. This is as the PBOC steps up efforts to support the nation's economic recovery and debt sales. Now, Beijing is considering a new round of stimulus to help the economy meet the official annual growth target of around 5%. Joining us now is Klaus Bader, global chief economist at SocGen. Klaus, great to see you. Look, one thing, and I know we've talked about this idea before, of when does the stimulus actually add up to something? A great quote from Macquarie on this, saying that there are two scenarios. One of these is that the piecemeal efforts would add up eventually. The second one is that at a certain point, the policy stance would turn more decisive as patience is exhausted. In your mind, are we closer to one or two?
I think at the moment we're closer to 1. I mean, we'll see. On Wednesday, we'll get the latest economic activity data, industrial production, retail sales, etc., for September, and we'll also get already the second quarter GDP numbers. And we think they're likely to point to a bottoming out of the economy. You know, even though the year-on-year rate in GDP is going to slow, that's really a base effect. The sequential growth is likely to have picked up a bit. The same is true for industrial production. Retail sales should be better. We also had some better news from the Golden Week. So, and there seems to be, although it's a bit stop-start and one has to be careful, a little bit of an improvement in the real estate sector. And that's, of course, absolutely key. One thing that I think is helpful, we're seeing this right across the Asia-Pacific region, which is an improvement in exports. And that should, you know, favor a little bit of an improvement in industrial production in China as well.
Klaus, we're obsessed with benchmarks, and the world is focused on 5% growth in China. I look at some of the numbers. The lending, new yuan lending in September was 2.3 trillion yuan, 1.4 in August, sorry, the month before. So you're looking at a 14-year low. When you see that kind of a ratchet higher in new lending and social financing as well, up 36% from August, how quickly can that deliver towards the 5% target, or is that going to take a heck of a lot longer?
No, I think it'll feed through, you know, relatively quickly. It is, of course, a reflection of the fact that the Chinese government is trying to stabilize the real estate sector. Now, I stress the stabilize because, you know, Xi Jinping's line still is that, as he says, housing is for living and not for speculation. And they don't want to reignite another major housing bubble. But I think that that does feed through, you know, relatively swiftly. And I think we're seeing that. Really, to a large extent, of course, the higher lending figures, or in particular the higher social financing numbers, are just a reflection of the government stepping up its stimulus measures. I think the big question is, will it require, and I know that your reporters have been speculating quite a lot about this, is the government, the central government, going to issue in scale central government bonds and stop relying on the local authorities leveraging up, which has been until now the strategy?
I mean, there are hints of that, right? Stimulus coming in the form of infrastructure spending, for example, which would seem more, again, central government led. But again, it comes down to this thing which we have talked about before, the ideology of Xi and the type of economic stimulus they do. I mean, does it need to get really bad to kind of resort to something, again, which seems more Western in nature?
Yes, but I mean, we talked about this last time when I was here. I mean, you know, how much infrastructure can you build? China infrastructure is, you know, pretty good. I'm not saying that nothing can be done, but you know, there I think decreasing returns to scale on this. Stabilizing the housing sector is clearly important, and we do seem to be seeing some progress towards that. What I'm more concerned about is the confidence in the private sector.